Okay, this is the third devlog, and it's not going to be as big as the past one. I haven't made all that much progress, but it's been a lot less time in between this one and the last compared to the last one and the one before that. And I didn't use my time very efficiently. It's been a series of mistakes, mostly with geology and plate tectonics. And as you can see, the planets look quite a bit different from last time. This is basically a satisfactory temporary placeholder for how I eventually want planets to look. It's got a system that generates simplex noise that's warped with domain warping in order to create terrain using a compute shader. Then it calculates the normals for that terrain and allows us to get these shadows. And these normals are as strong as they should be relative to the scale of the mountains. So if this planet were real, these shadows would actually look like that. They would be that strong. And for plate tectonics, it's a difficult task. I got part of the way there for making a nice planet with plate tectonics, but I did not make a system that worked in the end, and it's very performance heavy and difficult, and it's going to require more time to flesh out. And I've settled with this temporary placeholder right now because it works for the time being, and actually making decent looking planets is a thing that I can just focus on later. I think it will be possible, for instance, if I make a system that does all the plate tectonics at a really low resolution and then fills in the missing details with some algorithms and some noise, that could probably work. And for like really close in terrain, I'm also going to have to figure out some way to make hydraulic and possibly air erosion over time. And I don't think that it's impossible. I think it's just very difficult, but it would just be something that is sufficiently low priority that I need to put it off and just focus on base game mechanics to hopefully have something playable as soon as possible. And with that in mind, let's take a look at this. This is the economy menu. There's a bit to unpack here. As you can see down here, it's not entirely complete, but it's allowed me to display some of the economic systems of the game and hopefully make it clear what sort of economic features you're going to be working with as you're playing. And it's the beginning of the macro level economic features of the game. So this is the GDP graph. It's taking data from the past 5 years about your economy and just telling you the general size of it. Then there's a debt to GDP graph, which is again for the past 5 years. There's 20 data points in total, so one for each quarter. And as you can see down here, there's a reserves and a debt counter. And let me try something. So yeah, you can take out loans, you can pay that debt back, and gonna be honest, I haven't fully tested this to make sure that it works. And these up here, the total expenditures and the annual balance, that stuff requires me to add more game features before I can display anything here. Because right now there would just be no revenue or expenditures to track. And for loans, for this debt down here, it's going to go up each week by this interest rate, but scaled down to the weekly level. So, like, right now, this nation's credit rating is A or 5 acceptable, which means that every year it's going to have a 10% interest rate. So if I take this amount, it's going to go up by 10% next year. But it actually updates once per week. The rate is just scaled down to a weekly level. And then I've got this other tab right here, the market, which is showing you the statistics for every resource in the game as it pertains to your country. Like, for instance, we go down to electricity. 15 units of electricity are being produced, 5 units of wood, and so on. And all this stuff here is, most of it's like null and empty because I haven't added the correct recipes and ratios into each building yet. Like, it's not entirely functional, but it works for the time being. And like these sales taxes, import tariffs, or that should say export tariff. I made a mistake in labeling it. In the future, they will be input fields that will allow you to actually manually set the sales tax or the import tariff or the export tariff for that good to give you some more fine economic controls. Over here, there will be input fields for every goods sales tax, import tariff, or export tariff so that you don't have to go manually click through every single one of these, like I think 80 plus resources. Then over here, these are buttons that are currently functionless, but in the future, when I implement trade, they'll have the function to place import and export controls. Like this button right here, in its current state, would indicate that you're not allowed to import, say, wool. And this one right here would be for export, so you wouldn't be able to export it unless you click the button, and in the future the button will turn green and it'll have a check mark and say, yes, you can export this. And I'm thinking that in the future, probably most of these will be set to yes by default instead of no. And that's it for the macro level economic mechanics for now. So let's look at the planet. And so because I haven't been able to make the geography system work, and I wanted to simplify down the scale of the game during the technical development phase, which is right now, I don't want to make it too complex while I'm still developing it because it gets too hard to debug. I've temporarily gotten rid of the district system. The code still exists in the game's files for the district system. I've just turned it all off. And so for now, the entire planet is just one colony. And the system works pretty much the same way that it did before, except that I've... Where did the list of factories go? Huh, well, alright, well that's kind of strange. I didn't even know that that bug was there. Well, I'll just have to debug that later again, I guess. And so the system has been entirely reworked on the code level, even if it doesn't look all that much different. Obviously, there was a bug that I didn't expect. But the way that things work now is that there's no quality. That's just too much fine-grained detail. It's too hard to code. The previous economic code base was 2,200 lines long, and I could not debug it for the life of me. Like, you could not pay me to debug that thing. So, things have been simplified down somewhat. Each good has a local price within the colony, a market price, which hasn't been updated here, but it will be soon, for the entire nation, just so that you can compare and see what is more efficient to produce at where. And there's no workers at each building. However, the amount of buildings that you're allowed to build somewhere is limited by the number of people there, well, specifically the number of working adults. And the way that populations get money is that it's basically just the local GDP is distributed evenly among all the workers. And that's a temporary system because I really did not want to get into assigning employment to every single pop because the number of people here, the number of pops you'd have to run calculations for would start to get very, very bad. I'd have to work out ways to safely split pops to make sure that there are multiple cultures or species, that the there's no problem where one pop is working in a building and it's not big enough to fulfill all the demands, but all the other workers are of some different culture and they can't merge into the other pop, and so on. There's a lot of issues with trying to employ pops on buildings that might get resolved later, but I don't know if I can or if I should. And right now, giving the local GDP, which unfortunately I didn't display here, to the people just is a temporary measure to make sure that pops in later versions where I've added the recipes for each of the goods and fixed the buildings not appearing here can get the money that they need to buy stuff just for debug purposes. I don't think there's really all that much more to say about that other than the theoretical thinking. Because right now the year is 2000. If you look at how many people are employed in what in the United States, in real life, for instance, more than 80% of the population is employed in the service sector. They're not they're not cutting wood, they're not working in factories, they're not drilling oil. Most of them are working in services like call centers, restaurants, shops, and so on, like warehouses. Some of them are working in like law firms. You got research and development for some really high-end stuff, but most of the jobs in a developed country are service jobs, and that pretty much just comes with being a developed country, which means that something like Victoria games, where pops work at buildings that produce goods, doesn't work super well in the 21st, 22nd, and especially 23rd centuries. So having something like just a simple business sector that just craps out money or something would be a better solution for figuring out how much money pops are earning to buy stuff than having all of them work at a factory in an age where there's high levels of automation. And this opens some doors for automation techs to, say, increase the number of buildings you can have at a colony. That's an idea that might be explored later. And economics is something that I'm going to probably revisit in the future. Right now, it's just at a state where it would only require minor alterations and just me filling out all the recipes in order to make something that I can run just experiments with to make the game work. So now I want to discuss my future plans for the stuff that I'll be covering in the next devlog. It's going to be ships, stations, and trade. So for instance, this solar system here is the starting solar system for a country. I'm going to put another planet out here. I'm probably going to fill up this solar system with some more planets. And the home planet of this country is going to be a terrestrial planet. It's going to be a place that is going to be specialized in growing food. Its moon is going to be kind of like our moon, and as such would be very suited for heavy industry. The moon in real life would be an excellent place for heavy industry. And so that's going to give me the opportunity to test the trade system, which I'm going to have to develop. Now, the trade system is going to work by actually having freighters, ships that actually exist in the world and move to deliver stuff into the stockpiles of a local market on a planet. And The way that's going to work is you're going to have a trade company. It's going to have a freighter hub somewhere in the system or somewhere in the galaxy. It's going to look at where there are opportunities to buy at a low price and sell at a high price. And it's going to dispatch a freighter to go pick up the goods, deliver them somewhere, pay for the stuff on the way, make sure that it can refuel, and it's going to act as carriers of goods. These goods, they may look only like numbers on the graph, but unlike in other games where goods just are like they'd be up here in some kind of like resource monitor up here where they just sort of exist somehow all throughout the country. Resources in this game exist only at a specific location. You can't just instantly get a resource anywhere in the galaxy just because you mined it on some far off planet. You have to actually go deliver it. And so that's where freighters come in. But for making freighters, I'm going to have to make the code framework for ships and stations because this system requires a trade station in orbit around any recipient planet. It requires a freighter hub as a station, which may be that very same trade station, who knows? Something to think about for later. It's going to require ships that can travel to other planets and solar systems. And that means I'm going to have to create a patched conics physics approximation, and the math for hyperbolic orbits is a little bit different than the math for elliptical orbits for this approximation in Newtonian physics, this deterministic. So if you've ever played Kerbal Space Program, it's going to be a lot like that. It's kind of how it's going to look. But that also means that I can start making space stations, military ships, explorer ships. So the framework for all ships and stations is going to start getting developed in the next couple weeks. And hopefully with that, all the ships. And by that time, I'd be pretty close to having the mechanics needed for like an actual fleshed out game. And so after that, I would need diplomacy. I need to add some like the missing details. I need to add war mechanics and ship design and some technologies up here. But it's not implausible that I might have some kind of playable pre-alpha of the game in about 2 months or so. Like, that's an optimistic figure. And anytime I give a timeline for something, it usually takes much longer. But it's not implausible. And it would be very cool to see. It'd be very cool to have a bunch of people playing the game and debugging it once there are actually features to call it a game and actually play it. So, other than that, I don't really have anything else for today. I'll see you in, I don't know, couple months when I've got trade and space stations and ships going around.